Welcome to the tub.
Oh, good water level.
Yeah, it is. 100 pounds of meat in here now.
Here with my good friend Brent Drake. Welcome to the hot tub cold plunge layer, baby.
What's a good name of a podcast that you can do from a fjord plunge?
Freezing for a reason, baby.
Is that the name of it? Did you just come up with that?
Yeah, freezing for a reason.
I love it.
We're raising money for something. We don't know what yet.
We'll figure it out. 1% for the planet.
There you go. So here with my good friend Brent Drake, also happens to be an ultra endurance athlete, which I'm sure you weren't born that way. You've really worked into it. And I've got to see you put in a tremendous amount of effort.
It's a hobby.
Just a hobby.
It's a time consuming hobby.
No big deal.
For sure.
Why don't you tell us about your last race that you did? We start there.
Last race was the Moab 240. It was in Moab, Utah. It's a big 240-mile loop. It's got about 30,000 feet of vertical. It's got everything from mountains and snow to desert and heat. A lot of beautiful canyons. You run along the side of the Colorado River for a little bit. It's very rocky, as you would probably expect, but there are some areas that are pretty green with some soft soil, which you wouldn't think for Moab. But over the 240-mile loop, it really will give you everything that nature can throw at you. So it's got trees, it's got sun. This year was special. We had the eclipse, the annular eclipse. You got about 500 runners-ish that start the race. Usually about 50% finish for a variety of different reasons. Usually it comes down to training and preparation, not only for your muscles and your endurance, but also for your skin and the way that you have trained your feet and your grundle and your chafing ability to get across the finish line. So, there's some qualifiers that you need to hit before you go into a race like that. It's not just anybody off the street.
So, Brent, why don't you kind of give us a little intro into how did you get into ultra running in the first place?
For sure. So I think I took a typical path towards ultra running and endurance events in themselves. I was an athlete growing up, played a smorgasbord of sports, football, hockey, lacrosse, played lacrosse in college, graduated college, and I kind of was lost for a moment. I just didn't have anything to do. I was so used to reporting to the field at a certain time, putting in a couple hours of training, then graduated and I didn't have anything on my calendar. So I signed up for a local 10K in Colorado Springs. And that's what started it. I went from 10K to half marathon to marathon to triathlon, half Ironman. Then I think I did a 50K in there. And then a 50K jumped up to 100 miles from there. And then 100 miles, did a couple of those. And then just kept on searching. Found Moab Destination Trails races. I had signed up for Tahoe 200 2 years in a row during COVID. 1 year was canceled because of COVID. The next year was canceled because of the fires in and around Tahoe. And then they were able to transfer my application to Moab. And then I did Moab of last year. Moab in 2022. A very painful experience. Not because I was out of shape, just because my body wasn't ready. That beating over that many days. Just kind of like a constant grind took me 108 hours to finish. And then the most recent was Moab again, a couple weeks ago. Completely different experience. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I definitely crossed the finish line in really good shape, just mentally with it, physically with it. Could have easily kept on going. It was just really, I think, a testament to training, understanding my body, understanding preparation leading up to the race, both mental and physical, just getting in the right mindset for the effort that you need to put forth for a race like that.
So you said a couple things I want to touch on and maybe double click on. Your preparation heading into the race physically. What does that look like? And maybe include in that what's some of the things you do to keep your body tip top so that you can train as hard as you need to, including recovery and things of that nature.
I'll compare last year versus this year because it's night and day. So last year I was really focused on miles. How many miles could I do? Didn't put a lot of emphasis on vertical, which changed this year. I didn't put a lot of emphasis on the terrain I was running on, which was totally different this year. And I did not put a lot of emphasis on recovery. So it was mostly just I could grind out somewhere between 60 to 100 miles a week. And I relied on that number because that's what other guys and girls were doing leading up to the race that were performing very well. So even the leaders of the race were putting in about the same total miles as I was going into the race. And so both this year and last year. And so I felt I was in good shape. This year was different in the sense that, number one, I put a lot more effort into my miles. So I just didn't mail in 60 to 100 miles, but I was mixing up a lot of speed work. I was mixing up a lot of hill work. I was mixing up high intensity running versus just, 7 to 8 to 9 minute averages. I was trying to get down to like 6 miles, 6 minutes per mile, and really work my heart rate. As I mentioned, I put in a lot more vertical. So I was on the hill of life for at least 200 or 300 miles over the 3 months leading up to the race. Just a ton of vertical, probably 5x more vert this year than I did last year with the same amount of total miles. The hill of life terrain is very rocky. It's not like a flat town lake or a road. So my feet were getting beat up regularly, and I was training them almost like a punching bag or a baseball mitt to get really like kind of worn in for the punishment that I was going to give them over, the course of 3 to 4 days. And then I mentioned like the recovery aspect of it. So I did introduce ice baths into my routine this year for the first time. And I would say, if you talk to any of the guys that I've trained with, that was probably the biggest game changer for me in the sense that I could finish a run. Sometimes I'd ice bath right after. Sometimes I would wait a couple hours and let my body kind of heal on its own. And then I would go in for a cold plunge. But regardless of when I went into the cold treatment, what I noticed that my sleep was better, which made my recovery much faster and stronger. And then when I would get up the next day, I was ready to rumble. I was ready to put down another very solid effort. And what that allowed me to do was when I was doing a big training run after another big training run, I was able to run with intention, much more focused, with much more energy, just much more purpose than I had been doing the prior year. So it was almost like I would wake up and I'd feel fresh almost every day. And I was excited to get out of bed. I was excited, if I missed my run in the morning and it was 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., like I was still like raring to go because I knew that it was going to be a fun run and that my body was kind of like hungry for that punishment.
Yeah. And I know one thing you touched on a little bit is the mental toughness that it takes to participate in endurance athletes like you do at the level that you do. I'm curious to ask if, a lot of people, when they think about cold plunging, they think about the mental barrier that it is to convince themselves to get in, 40-degree water for a few minutes and get that therapy. How has that translated from either ultra sports into your ability to do cold plunging, or from cold plunge and the toughness there over into endurance?
There's a definite parallel between proper cold plunging and not only running, but anything, business, relationships, just being a dad and, having the patience to deal with, a 7-year-old that's doing cartwheels, most of the day. When I get into the plunge, it's almost like I'm focusing on separating my mind from what my body is feeling. So there's a couple tricks you can do that I've learned over the last, 6 to 8 months since I've been cold plunging regularly. And that's one of the things that's called the physiological sigh, where you take 2 deep nose breaths and then you exhale out through your mouth, and it brings your stress level down to something that's manageable. So when I first started, I was able to last, a minute or two tops in a cold plunge. And by the time I got comfortable with it and I was able to work through my breathing, I could sit in there 5-10 minutes at, 39 degrees, no problem.
Right. Yeah. There's a big sort of complementary, positively correlated relationship between proper breathing and cold water therapy. Wim Hof, obviously a really popular, example of this and has his own protocols. Do you have a particular cold plunge protocol that you like to do, certain temperature at a certain amount of time?
I do. I like it as cold as possible, as close as I can get to freezing as possible. But I do like having, some type of heat available to me that I can really tax my system from like a central nervous standpoint, where I can freeze my balls off and then I can go roast my balls and then get back in and freeze them again. So my protocol is usually 3 to 5 sets, somewhere between like 5 to 7 minutes of heat and 5 to 7 minutes of cold.
Wow.
I try to cycle through those. So I'm really getting my body as hot as possible and as cold as possible, hot as possible, cold as possible, and really cycle through that. And I think, after some practice, it's almost like my body craves it now.
Yeah.
It's like if it's not if I'm not getting those extremes. And with Texas, it's easy. Like if it's Texas, if you have a cold plunge, like you can just get out and the weather is already hot enough, to Texas sun, or, if it's in your garage, like, your garage is 105 degrees as is. That worked out for me really well.
Contrast therapy is super popular, and also something that I see a lot of athletes do, which I think you can do with either a sauna or the Texas heat, as you imagine, or even just like warm water, hot water.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so I kind of want to go back to ultra for a second.
Yeah.
I can't even put my mind around what it would be like to run 100 miles, let alone 240 miles in Moab with all that terrain, with the conditions that you described. When you were at mile 200 and you're kind of, maybe your body's feeling the wear and so forth, and maybe even your mind is starting to struggle from the lack of sleep and the things that you're putting yourself through, what are some of the ways you break through those mental barriers?
The biggest thing for me is understanding that what I'm feeling in the moment is temporary. So given the fact that I've done a number of these and I've been through, it's an interesting thing with ultras is that you look at the average age of the podium or the top 10. And whereas most running races, you're down in like the low 20s, maybe upper 20s, low 30s. For ultras, it's like high 40s, low 50s. Even mid 50s. So, Florida this year, first place was 52 years old. Second place was 53. Third place was, I think, 52 or 53. 3 or 4 through 10 was younger than that. The reason why I think that makes the most importance is that those people have put their mind in similar situations enough times before that they're comfortable enough with their body to know that their body can push through the pain that it's feeling in that moment. I think what happens with ultras, people get so discouraged because, I saw this at mile 35 of this year's race. This dude was so taxed. He was going to the second aid station at mile 40, and he's like, I'm quitting. I'm over. This is a big, famous LA athlete that was, supposed to win the race. And he said, I'm throwing in the towel. This isn't for ultras, not for me. And me and the group that ran into him in the last couple miles that we ran with him before we got to the aid station, we talked him through the fact that what he was feeling now is going to be completely opposite to what he's going to be feeling in mile 200 and what he's going to be feeling in mile 230. Oftentimes you feel better crossing the finish line than you do 10 miles into the race. And that's just because, the mind in itself is so powerful, and the pain that you're feeling in most senses is up here. You have your blisters, which suck, but blisters you can get through, muscle pulls, strains, tired muscles, dehydration. These are all things that you can correct during the course of a long race like that. And so being able to understand whether it's through your own mental strength or through being in enough of those situations before, there's really nothing that you can throw at your body that, if you're conditioned enough with experience or with just the ability to take yourself out of your body, there's nothing that you can't overcome. Like a lot of these guys, you cross the finish line at 240 and they can keep going. They can keep going until 500.
Sure.
So that's what you're seeing in the sport right now. They used to say 200 is the new 100, and now they're saying 300 is the new 200. And you can see, because all these people are kind of mastering this distance, and they're saying, if you train right and if you run right, there's no limit to how much you can do. And that's when you get into the conversation of like Pacific Coast Trail, Appalachian Trail, Arizona Trail, Colorado Trail, which are, 5 to 3,000 mile races that guys and girls are putting down record times in, because they're now able to see that other people have crossed these bridges and that it's totally within their capacity to do the same. It's the famous running case where it's, the 4-minute mile was impossible to break. Thousands of people tried to break the 4-minute mile. Nobody was successful. And then Roger Bannister breaks it, runs 3:59 something. And then right after he breaks the 4-minute mile, 500 people break it within like the next 2 years afterwards.
Unbelievable.
Because he broke through that. And so you see the same thing with ultras. You see the same thing with distance accomplished, with speed. And it's really a testament to, having that, your mind be able to control what your body is feeling, what it's doing, how it's acting. And, there's really no limit to what it's capable of.
Amazing. I've known you for 10 years and I've seen you just kind of quietly and humbly power through these, superhuman events and other things in your life besides racing that has always kind of impressed me. Who do you look to kind of as a mentor or someone that has inspired you, either that you know personally or that you just know from, their inspiration online?
I really like Dr. Joe Dispenza. He's the one that comes to mind when you're talking about mind over matter, his ability to heal his back. He was written off by the medical community as never going to be the same as he was. Like, case done, signed.
Mm.
And he was able to work within his own mind to see his body through the healing process, even though he's written off by the medical community. I use him as an example because that's an extreme example, but still, like, even small things of like, you have a cramp that won't go away. You have a blister that's just nagging the shit out of you.
Mm-hmm.
You are just dead tired and you have, 90% of the race left. I'll always go back to Dispenza and be like, okay, if this guy can heal himself from a broken back, like, I can get over a blister.
Yeah.
And he's just, he's one of many examples. Like, the cliche example is obviously David Goggins. I knew I didn't want to bring him up, but like, I think early on he was a thought leader in not using motivation as a tool to get across the finish line, but using discipline and like your own personal commitment. If you say you're going to do something, throw motivation out the window. You're going to do it because you said you're going to do it. And I definitely took that to heart. I think the way that he's able to deliver that message, aside from everything else that, that he does from an athletic or, mentally strong place, kind of going back to like, you don't overcomplicate the situation. You said you're going to do it. Don't let anything cloud your thought. Just get it done. And being able to kind of mess with time in the sense that what you're feeling right now may seem like forever, understanding that time is what you make of it and it's how you understand time allows you to kind of manipulate it. So that a 240-mile race seems like a 10K or it seems like a marathon. It doesn't seem like you're spending 100+ hours grinding through crazy mountainous territory. Like, you pull yourself out of that body experience and you realize the infinite amount of time and how both large it is, but how small it is. I don't want to go too deep into that.
Starting to sound like Stephen Murray.
That space-time continuum. But yeah, just being able to manipulate the way you feel, using your brain to manipulate your body into feeling better and to manipulate your understanding of time so that there are races that may seem like they're going to take forever and that there's no way that you're going to make it through to the finish line with the pain that you're feeling at that particular time, pulling yourself out and being like, this is just such a small fraction of time. You can just do it, which is one foot in front of the other.
And one of the ways that I know Brent is through our book club that we're in, we read a book a couple of years ago, probably, The Comfort Crisis, which had a really cool concept in there, which I actually heard about separately through Jesse Itzler, who's kind of a mentor of mine from a distance, about the misogi, right? So setting something on your calendar that is so big that there's a 50% chance that you'll fail at it, but you really rise to it, you aim towards it. So what's next for you? You just did Moab 240. Is there anything else on the horizon that you're already looking at?
There's a couple things that I have on the horizon. Number one is I've been running on the Town Lake Trail for 20 years. It's a 10-mile loop. And there is a FKT, a fastest known time for 100 miles on Town Lake. It's called the Town Lake Challenge. And it's currently set at somewhere around like the 23-hour mark. And so next month, I'm going to give it an effort to try to beat that time. 10 loops around Town Lake. It's 100 miles. In this particular instance, it's how many loops can you do in 24 hours? So I'm going to try to do 11 loops, at least 11 loops, hopefully 12 in 24 hours and drop like 110 or 120 miles and claim that FKT.
Amazing. I'll be out there with your goo pouches and beers and whatever you need.
You're not allowed to support. That's the one thing with, if you run unsupported, you have to carry all of your food. So I'll carry all of my nutrition in a pack, and I'm allowed to get tap water and use the toilets on the trail, but I can't have mental support, emotional support, or any sort of physical nutritional support out there.
Interesting.
So
that truly is a challenge then.
Yeah.
That'll be good. Anything I didn't ask that you wanted to speak about recovery-wise, mental toughness, physical toughness?
There is this thought that I've been working with recently, and that's like, I think that, and this I'll get on my soapbox, if you like look at your life, everybody's got challenges, no matter who you are. And what I found is that if you are proactive and you go out and seek challenges, stress-inducing challenges, versus let them come to you, the amount of stress-inducing challenges that come to you that you have to react to become far less when you're going out and you're finding them and you're seeking them and you're taking on new challenges. And so things like ultras, things like starting businesses, things like relationships, things like, having tough conversations with the people that you love or that you've lost touch with, they have a way of giving you much more control of your life so that when things inevitably do get thrown at you, that you're in a much better place to handle them. But also what I found is that less and less stressful situations get put on your plate when you're actively going and seeking them. Yes. So with that kind of thought process, like I'm now in the mindset where like I'm looking at like, all right, what are the most fucked up things that I can go try to find to do so I can get ahead of the inevitable, stressful, terrible situations that want to like come my way.
Absolutely.
And so that's the one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah. To put it in medical terms, right? Dr. Rhonda Patrick calls it hormesis, putting yourself through acute stressors on purpose, cold water exposure being one of them, heat being another one, exercise and so forth makes you more robust in the rest of your life.
Totally.
Brent, it's been a pleasure. It's starting to get hot.
Yeah, same.
So
appreciate it.
Time to hit the cold plunge.
Great tub here.